Okay, on Shabbos, we did the practical halachos of this year's situation. We're going to get into the discussion about the dinim of the Seder that you need to keep. Now, we said the first Seder, you're not allowed to start before nightfall. Because the mitzvah of matzah, the Torah says, Balayla hazeh, on this night. So therefore, the Gemara learned out, you have to eat matzah only at night. When the Chachamim instituted the 4 cups of wine, they instituted the same way the biblical mitzvah of matzah is. So therefore, the Gemara says you're not allowed to make kiddush, which was one of the 4 cups, before nightfall. So even though a lot of times you could bring Shabbos in early and all that, but when it comes to the Seder, though, you cannot begin the Seder before nightfall. Another thing is that all the obligations of the night, which are biblical obligations, rabbinic obligations, men and women are equal in the obligation. So let's discuss, first of all, the Seder plate. Okay? Now, the Seder plate is called ka'ara. Ka'ara actually means a tray. Now, there's a lot of different ways that people would set up the Seder plate. The universally accepted way of having a Seder plate is based on the teachings of the Arizal. That's the Seder plate that most people use, is the Arizal Seder plate, and it's actually based on Kabbalah, besides halacha. And that is like this. According to our custom, which is based on the Arizal, most people, you have 3 matzahs, and then you have the Seder plate next to each other. In our circles, we have them one on top of the next. Which means like this. At the bottom of the matzahs, you have a silver tray, or silver plated, or something. You have a silver tray. And that goes the 3 matzahs. So the way it goes the 3 matzahs, you'll have a cover, like a napkin or a cloth. Then you put the bottom matzah, you put a cloth, then the second matzah, and then you put the third matzah. Now, the matzahs basically are Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. There's 2 opinions in Kabbalah. Is it Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, or is it Yisrael, Levi, Kohen? Is the Kohen on the top or the Kohen on the bottom? In other words, the difference is it Kli? Kli means a vessel. Chof Lamed Yud is Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. Or is it Yelech? Yelech, which is Yisrael, Levi, Kohen. So these are 2 different opinions. So we have the Seder, the ka'ara at the bottom, a plain round plate. Then you have the 3 matzahs. And then you put a cover over the matzahs, waterproof. And then you set up the Seder plate. So how do you set up the Seder plate? The zeraya is on the top right. And on the top left is the beitzah. And then you have the mortar. And then you have underneath the zeraya is the chareses. And then underneath the karpa, underneath the beitzah is the karpas. And then you have again the mortar, the chazeres as it's called. Okay? So if you look, it's basically right, left, center, right, left, center. So you have like this. The way it works according to Kabbalah, we know Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, right? Chesed is right, Gevurah is left, and Tiferes is in the middle. So the Seder plate, the way it's set up, we have all 10 spheres on one place. The bottom plate is Malchus. Malchus is the Kaiser Shur Sessa. Malchus is Makabel. So Malchus is the Keli. Then you have the 3 matzahs represent Chochmah, Bina, and Das. The intellectual levels. And then you have the 6 things on the Seder plate. That's Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. And Malchus is at the bottom. So you have all 10 levels on the Seder plate as is. Now, what do people use for the various different things? So there's a lot of different customs. First, the zeraya, some people use actually a shank bone. Bone from a cow or whatever. Our custom is to use the neck of a chicken. That's our custom. And not only that we roast it, but we take off most of the meat that's on the bone. there shouldn't be any similarity to the Korban Pesach. Because there's an interesting halacha, you're not allowed to eat roasted meat both nights of the Seder. Not roasted meat and not roasted chicken. Now the definition of roasted is, in halacha it's called tzli kedar, which means a pot roast. What does tzli kedar mean? You take a piece of meat and put it into a pot, no liquid, no nothing, and you cook it, or you bake it like that. That you're not allowed to eat that type of meat, or roasted chicken, or barbecue chicken, or meat you're not allowed to eat both nights of the Seder. During the day it doesn't matter. Why? Because we don't want any similarity to the Korban Pesach in any way whatsoever. So the Israel, we use a neck of a chicken. Some people use different things. Beitza, we use a hard-boiled egg. Okay? The Maror, so again, in the Gemara, this discusses 5 species that are good for Maror. The first one is chazeres, which is lettuce. And the third one is horseradish. Now in Europe, people didn't use romaine lettuce because it didn't exist in Europe. Romaine, where they lived, it didn't exist. So everybody used to use horseradish. Okay? But here in America, but the problem with the romaine lettuce is you have to make sure there's no bugs. You have to soak it and clean it to make sure that there's no bugs in the water. But what needs to be taken into consideration is if somebody wants to soak the lettuce in water to make sure there's no bugs, and you soak it for 24 hours, it's not kosher maror anymore. Because there's a din in Yoredea, kovish kamavushal. Something that's soaked for 24 hours, even though it's cold, is considered cooked. In other words, if I take a brand new pot, and pour in a container of milk into the pot, and put it into the refrigerator for 24 hours, that pot halachically is a dairy pot, as if I cooked milk in it. As if I cooked milk in it. So therefore, second, cooked maror is you're not allowed to, you can't be yotze for maror. It says in Shechonah clearly it cannot be cooked. Another thing, if you're adding a lot of salt water, then the din is salty water halachically cooks in 18 minutes. That means if you soak your romaine lettuce in a lot of salt water, heavy duty amount of salt, you have to make sure it stays in the water less than 18 minutes, because if it's more than 18 minutes, again, it's not kosher to use. So basically you have to be careful to wash the lettuce, clean the lettuce. So in our custom, we use romaine lettuce plus actual horseradish, ground up, because otherwise it's impossible to eat. So that's what we use for maror. Then for charesis, our custom is to use apples, pears, and nuts. And later on, we add a little bit of wine to the charesis. I know people make the Sfardim have a lot of interesting things they put into the charesis. But it used to be a custom that they would put in ginger and cinnamon also. But the Rebbe writes we don't do that anymore because it was a question with chametz. So again, our Chabad, the charesis in Chabad is apples, pears, and nuts. Very simple. And then later on, we'll add, and again, the karpas, what do you use for karpas? Alpidin, any vegetable which is adama. Okay, is allowed to be used for karpas. In our custom, the Rebbe writes we use either potato or onion. The Rebbe himself used onion. So in Chabad, we generally use onion for the karpas. A little bit, a small onion for the amount of karpas. That's the Seder plate. Okay? So now, and our custom is to set up the Seder. You can't do it any earlier anyway this year. But we set up the Seder plate after we come home from shul, before we start, even if it's not Shabbos before. We don't set up the Seder plate before. The host's Seder plate, we set up after coming home from shul. Now there's another interesting difference, custom between Sephardic and Ashkenazim, which is really based in a halacha difference. By Ashkenazim, usually all the men, even kids, also have their own Seder plate. We own 3 matzahs with a Seder plate, we have our own. By Sfardim, the custom is 1 per household. The head of the household, and that's it. Nobody else has their own Seder plate. What's it dependent on? So there's a rule in halacha that says, Reiv am hadras melech. When a lot of people do something together, it glorifies the king. So a lot of people, like it says, you should preferably hear a Megillah in shul where there's a lot of people, rather than individually, because Reiv am hadras melech, it just looks nicer. So the Sfardim of this opinion, by the way, and they keep it every Shabbos, like that I'll explain in a second. So they have 1 Seder plate, because then everybody's part of that Seder plate, so it's the beautification of the king. And Ashkenazim, no, they say every person should have their own. The same thing, there's different customs. Whether you have, let's say, a bunch of bar mitzvah kids, does only one person make kiddush for everybody, or does everybody make their own kiddush? So by Sfardim, the head of the household makes kiddush, and that's it. And by Ashkenazim, they all make kiddush. That's the basic difference between this, the Seder plate, or everybody has their own Seder plate, or one person has it. Either way is fine. It's still Judaism, and it's fine to be Yetzer the mitzvah. Okay, so now you come to the first thing of, what did you want to ask? I hope it's pertaining to this.
It was that caving that became dairy. You put water in it?
We're not talking. Okay, so now the first thing of the Seder is kadesh. Now the Meril writes that there's the Seder is so utmost important. There's nothing in the Seder that's insignificant. Every minor detail of the Seder has its place in halacha and Kabbalah, and it has a lot of meaning to it. So every aspect of the Haggadah and the customs of the Seder are very, very important. So now you have Kadesh. Kadesh is the first of the 4 cups. That's why we said you're not allowed to make Kiddush earlier. Because it's Saturday night, so you're making Kiddush and Havdalah together. It's called Yak Nahaz. Yayin, Kiddush, Ner, Havdalah, Zman. So you're making both things together. Now normally the way it works on a Friday night meal, the head of the household, let's say, makes Kiddush, and then he pours in for the women, to give everybody a little bit of wine. You can't do that by the Seder, because everybody has to drink their own cup of wine. So what are you going to do? You can't give from your cup to everybody. They need their own cup of wine. There's a few ways it could be done. 2 ways it could be done. Either before Kiddush, everybody gets their wine poured, full cup. Then the head of the household makes Kiddush. The women, let's say, will hear his Kiddush, answer Amen, and it's like they said Kiddush, and then they sit down and they drink the wine. Or, if they want, they can make their own Kiddush. If the women want to say their own Kiddush, they can say their own Kiddush. The only thing is, if the women make their own Kiddush, they can't say Shechianu again, because they already made it a candle lighting. So they can't make Kiddush Shechianu again, because again, it's either candle lighting or Kiddush. So that's that Kiddush. Okay, so now, you hold the cup in your hand, okay? So you say, the bracha, then you look at the candles. Our custom is we don't do anything with the candles. We just look at them. We don't go like this, like we do Saturday night. Look at the candles and say the bracha bein ha'eish. Then you say the last bracha, and then you say the bracha Shachianu. Okay, and then everybody sits down and drinks the wine. Now the men, halachically, have to recline when they drink the wine. Men have to recline when they drink the wine. Women, there are a few exceptions, but generally speaking, the accepted tradition, and that's our custom also, women do not recline. Because it's not there's a lot of issues in halacha. It says if choshev yawet, bottom line is, women today don't recline, the men recline. Now, if a student is sitting in his Rebbe's presence, so then he doesn't recline unless if his Rebbe says he could recline. Unless if he says the Rebbe could recline. then he has to. It says a child in the presence of the father does recline, because we assume that the father gives him permission, even though the Alter Rebbe doesn't say this, but there are poskim that say the child should ask the father permission to recline. What?
The Rebbe gave permission. I mean, people didn't lean, right? By the Seder.
By the Rebbe Seder, nobody reclined. Now, when the previous Rebbe was alive, and the Rebbe ate upstairs, so the Rebbe also didn't recline. The year the previous Rebbe passed away, Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud, so that year the Rebbe also ate upstairs by his mother-in-law, by the Rebbetzin. But the Rebbe reclined. That year the Rebbe did recline. So the big Chassidim said, but the Rebbe is still here. You know, the Rebbe is still here. So the Rebbe said, feelings don't change halacha.
What feeling?
Feelings do not change halacha. Halacha is he's not here, right? Feelings that he is here, that's good, but it can't change halacha. So the Rebbe reclined, but nobody else at the table reclined. Nobody.
So,
And even the Rebbe gave permission, they wouldn't have done it anyway.
so in general, if a teacher gives permission,
If a teacher gives permission, then he has to recline. The teacher doesn't have to give him
I
permission.
mean, he has to, or can he say, I still want to show...
If he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to. By a nasi is a whole different story.
Halacha says to recline.
Huh?
Halacha says recline.
Yeah, but in the presence of the Rabbi, it says you don't recline. Unless if he gives you permission. He's not obligated to give you permission. The Rebbe probably didn't give him permission because he knew even if he did, they wouldn't recline. What?
Can the student ask the Rebbe to
You can ask the Rebbe permission.
is it not?
You could. There's no problem with it. And the Rebbe can tell him, yeah. What?
The 4 cup of the wine you're going to drink, including the first one or
Yeah, the Kiddush is number 1.
number 1?
Yeah.
Not 5, it's 4.
No, it's 4. Only 4. You drink 5, you get a sin for adding on to the mitzvahs. Chum said 4, it means 4, not 5. Huh? Yeah, during the meal you could eat, because that does good.